China, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Arlena.
I'm really excited to talk to you because we have a lot of really important topics to cover. I might have to add a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode. We're going to talk about some really important things for people that are, in recovery, thinking about getting into recovery. So it might get a little heavy, but I am a nervous laugher. So I have a nervous giggle, which is annoying. I'm aware from the comments that I get. There it is. There's the nervous laugh again. So, but that's me. So anyways, I am really excited to talk about your sober experience and the work that you do. I typically start off with a fun little thing called the lightning round, where we kind of put some resources on the front end.
Okay.
So if you're willing to play, do you have a favorite book or a favorite book that helped you get sober or evolve in the very beginning?
Well, there is a book by an author using the pen name Bucky Sinister, and he wrote a book called Get Up, 12 Steps for Misfits, Freaks, and Weirdos. And I actually ran into it a number of years into my recovery, but I really appreciated it because a lot of us come to the rooms of recovery feeling a little like, I don't know if I actually fit in here. I think a little differently than other people. And it puts the 12-step framework into a little more loose interpretation in terms of you don't have to be perfect in order to do this. Here's some language around that. And it makes it feel a lot more welcoming and safe for people who feel kind of like misfits, freaks, and weirdos in the rooms of recovery.
Yeah, I've often heard of it as the land of misfit toys. So I like that someone just kind of tells it like it is. That's awesome. I'm gonna actually have to check that out. Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you live by?
I believe it is Winston Churchill, and he said, never, never, never give up hope.
Oh, I love that. That's often a topic at meetings, and I've heard the acronym for HOPE, like hearing other people's experience, or there are many others that escape me at the moment. Yeah, I love that. Never, never give up hope. Do you have a regular self-care or recovery routine?
I do. In the beginning of my recovery, I was a single parent trying to hold down a household and practice my basic recovery, services and skills. And everybody said meditate. And I was like, I don't have any time to meditate. And I had a really smart person who said, you take a shower every morning? And I said, yep. And they said, do it in there. No kids. 5 minutes to yourself. You don't need a lot of time, but just kind of ground yourself, get your brain into your body and set your intention for the day. And so that was a really simple thing. My self-care practice is a lot more involved than 5 minutes in the shower because I'm older, my kids are grown, and I don't have to, I've got more time at this point. So it has grown and developed, but I want people to realize that if you are one of those people that you're multitasking 1,000% of the time, you can still do meditation, self-care. It just looks differently than a lot of times we try to box it in our head into I've got to be on a mat and I've got to do an hour at a time, and that's not true. You can do it while you make your grocery list or iron the clothes. So it's just being intentional about things.
Right. No, I love it. What's funny is when we're drinking and using, we have hours upon hours dedicated to drinking and using. And then we get sober. And it's like, I can't take 10 minutes to meditate. Are you insane?
I know. We feel like our lives will actually implode if we put some space between things.
It's amazing how quickly our days fill up, though. And really it seems like the only thing I do in moderation is self-care, and it seems like it's the last thing. It is what my common lie I tell myself, I'll do it later. I'm gonna just do this one thing. I'm gonna just check my email real quick
tomorrow. But that, I mean, that's so much about the whole foundations of addiction and recovery is putting things off. Like I work with people all the time that are contemplating doing something about their relationship with substances at this point. And, you know, one of those interventions is often detox or treatment, and they never want to go at the moment, you know, like, let's go right now. Oh, no, 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 I need the rest of today. I'll do it tomorrow. And I'm like, tomorrow doesn't usually come. Like tomorrow, there's always a tomorrow.
Yeah, there is no later. I keep telling my boys that when I ask them to do dishes or something. There's no later.
Got to do it now.
Got to do it now. That's okay. So you mentioned that your self-care practice is a little more involved today.
Oh yeah.
How much time do you dedicate to do you do it in the morning, your self-care practice?
I do it throughout the day. I call it snacking, you know, like intentional snacking. And it's
self-care snacking. I like that.
Yeah, self-care snacking. So say like I'm on you've got one of those days that you've got back-to-back Zoom meetings all day. Yeah. And a Zoom meeting ends 12 minutes early. Well, that's 12 minutes that's yours now. So instead of sitting there mindlessly waiting for the next meeting, you know, I like to incorporate movement. So basically, if I'm spending a lot of time in front of a screen, get up and move my body, get my blood moving. As my grandfather would have said, blow the stink off of me. So sometimes that's as simple as you know, go getting a glass of water to hydrate. Sometimes I've got enough time and it's sunny, I can walk out, step outside and do a little walk around the block real quick.
Love that. Get your vitamin D.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you attend meetings, 12-step meetings, or?
I do attend meetings. My foundation is in 12-step recovery. And I think probably for the first few years, that's all I did. As my recovery kind of grew some legs and roots, I realized that I needed to recover not just from a substance, but from some behaviors as well. And that led me to other 12-step groups that weren't focused on mental health or substance use disorder. And then from there, I realized that mutual support's kind of a big arena, and that sometimes there are informal groups that kind of have coffee at 6:30 a.m. on Sundays or something like that, that I end up with really good mixes of people that I find beneficial to keep my recovery principles nice and solid. So my recovery meeting schedule is not all 12-step based at this point. There's some Buddhist recovery. There's some specific to women, specific to trauma. I've had some experiences in my past that, you know, I think we'll talk about them, but, you know, I have some human trafficking in my story. So getting with my survivor sisters, and being able to kind of just share our common experiences and some of the barriers that we come up against, just trying to do life on life's terms and giving each other some information and support to help get us through those things.
You know, it's interesting. I had an exchange with this lady the other day on social media, and, you know, there's a fair amount of bashing of 12-step groups. And it always makes me really sad. And I guess sometimes I come off as defensive because it was so good for me. And so I'm actually currently writing a survival guide on the 12-step. If people want to go to 12-step, here are some context and ideas and you know, have some perspective on these ideas so that you can move through that community and get what you need without getting tripped up or whatever. But I understand that. And so when I was having this exchange with this lady, I was like, you know, you could find better meetings. And she was like, how do I find better? And I was like, okay, that's a good point. That's actually a valid point. And so when you're new, you know, number one, maybe you don't know what all your issues are, right? Like you mentioned, you know, 3 specific, you know, a Buddhist group, a trauma group, a women's group. How did you find these other groups?
Some of them I sought out, like for instance, when I realized I had an unhealthy relationship with food, I said, you know, where do you go for I didn't really have a food addiction, but I just had an unhealthy relationship with it. And Overeaters Anonymous came up. So again, 12-step framework, but for a different behavior, dysfunctional behavior. And And then from those groups, sometimes I would bring up a topic or an issue in the meeting, and I would have a bunch of ladies pull me to the side and say, we meet on Wednesdays at 6:30 to hash out relationship issues or parenting issues, or so kind of subset of recovery. So it's not big picture stuff. Some of it is more drilled down. But again, some of us have big issues that we have to navigate in terms of how do we change our relationships to more healthy and functional. And for me, the substances I used were but a symptom of the internal chaos and dysfunction that I had kind of baked into me that I had to start to crack open and undo.
Yeah, I find that the 12 step is great for crisis management, right? Like you get over the hump, but eventually, if you continue to go to meetings or get support or focus on stopping drinking or using, that problem does resolve. I know people are like, oh my gosh, I've struggled with this issue. Okay, but it does resolve. And then we have the opportunity to go deeper. But it's almost like you have to resolve the crisis of the drugs and alcohol. And then you have and then it's like you wake up and the fog starts to clear and you're like, oh, I also have an unhealthy relationship with food, with men, and those are more like process addictions or yeah.
But the step process, again, it goes back to, is something making my life unmanageable? I feel powerless over it. And what can I do?
Yeah. And I like that you don't have to do it perfectly either. A lot of times people go, oh, well, step one, my life's not unmanageable, so I don't qualify. And my thinking is, just kind of keep going. Do your best on that step and then just keep going. And then anyway, so no, that's really good. Okay, so that was a lot for self-care. I have a tendency to go off. What's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
What is one thing that I think I needed to know, that being perfect was not required. It really felt, and I think maybe because I was involved in a court system, and the court system had this very strict abstinence based, you have to be at the courtroom, you have to look a certain way, you have to speak a certain way. Like, it felt like there was a lot. It felt like it was going to be a lot easier to fail than to succeed in all of that. And so there were things that I was not addressing at an authentic level, because I was trying to check the boxes of the systems that I was involved in. I was 100% fearful that, based on the level of my craving that I was experiencing, that I was not going to be successful long-term at this. And I wish I could have been more honest. I wish I could have been more transparent with my sponsor, and really say, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And I don't know how, you say I'm going to do this a day at a time. I don't know if I'm going to make it through the next 10 minutes.
I know. Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that I love about recovery supports, is it gives us a very large arena to practice being beautifully flawed, imperfect people.
Yeah. And recovery supports is something, what you're referring to as a program that you work with?
Supports us. So I want you to think that we have prevention. So giving people information and connection and resources, so they never have to use an alcohol or a substance to mask a feeling, augment a feeling, nullify a feeling, or deal with life on life's terms. And that's all well and good, but many of us get into places that we do feel that we use a substance or alcohol to feel something, do something, fit in. And then at that point, you're no longer dealing with prevention, you're dealing with intervention of where are you in this? Is this are you experimenting and you haven't developed any addictive patterns? Is a dependency forming? Is this mild substance use disorder, moderate, severe? And we very often in our systems, because addiction is so stigmatized and It's a disease of isolation a lot of times, that the more shame, the more you're realizing you lose control over when and where and how you're going to use, you pull away from the very things that could support you through that, because of that internalized shame and bias, and thinking other people will look down upon what you're doing and how you got there. So at that point, we're dealing with treatment or intervention. And then after an intervention, after you've been connected to a service or support to address the disorder, recovery support services is what comes after. And the gold standard of that, and if you're familiar with 12-step recovery, we just want you to do it a day at a time. But what we don't tell you is we want you to do that for the rest of your life. Like, that's our goal for you. We don't want you to get through today, but we'd like you to wake up tomorrow and give it your best shot too.
Yeah.
Recovery supports is that place that we can connect people to all the services, resources, rebuild their connections in their life, so that they build these thriving lives where the substances really don't have much power over them anymore, because they have so much good stuff in their life. They're like, why would I do that? I don't need to do it anymore. I don't need to fill in the potholes in my soul with a chemical. So recovery supports is those services that help people build thriving lives in recovery. 12-step is a mutual support group that's free and available in church basements everywhere.
And not run by professionals.
Not run by professionals, right. But there is a professional field which is emerging that's not tied to a 12-step model. It supports the multiple pathways of recovery. So you basically define a recovery wellness plan for somebody and what their goals for their recovery are. And then you point them in that direction and give them some information about the disorder that they're dealing with and the services and supports they might connect with that could help them. And then you walk next to them along the way, so they don't have to be alone.
Yeah.
And the gold standard in recovery supports, there's this magical number of 60 months or 5 years. And if you can get somebody to 5 years of recovery, did you know that their relapse rate over the rest of their lifetime drops to 15% or less?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So basically, we have this marker that if we know we consistently help and support people, and it's not like you have to stay with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sometimes we're talking about a monthly check-in just to see, hey, those recovery goals that you define, do we need to adapt those? Have you done a great job with them, knocking them out of the park? Is there something you're currently struggling with that you weren't struggling with last month? So in the beginning, just like in, post-treatment, you might need to go to a meeting every day, where later and later, the more you are building your independent, self-sufficient life, you've got other things to do, and you might only go to a meeting a couple times a week.
Right. Yeah.
So recovery supports is just a kind of a professional level of support that, it's a paraprofession technically, but if you don't know what paraprofessionals are, like paralegals, they are people who support professionals in the field. Paramedics, they support, they're the professional support you get before you get to the hospital, right? And they keep you alive. Well, peer recovery supporters are paraprofessionals we are adjuncts and supports to the clinical world or professional world if it's healthcare. But we just basically make sure people have the information, connect to the services to stay alive until they are able to do that on their own.
Oh, that's beautiful. Before we jump into your story, what is if people are interested in that and just want to hop off the podcast and start getting some services, how do they reach out to you?
Oh, I work for Thrive Peer Recovery Services, and you can reach us at thrivepeersupport.com.
Awesome.
Or you can call 877-636-3777.
Awesome. I'll leave the links in the show notes, but thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a yeah, sounds like a really good treatment plan and very reasonable and holistic, which is what we all need, not
Yeah.
just people in
And
it.
it can be in any facet of a person's recovery too. So it can be somebody who is just coming out of treatment or jail or a hospital setting. It can be somebody who's got a couple years in recovery who realizes, you know what, I want to go deeper into this and I'm not quite sure where to go. I feel like I've gone as far as I can in the connections I currently have. This is just a professional that basically explores at some different levels, bio, psychosocial, spiritual, and environmental. Where do you want to go?
Yeah, and I could also see, I'm in long-term sobriety, and I could also see that being useful when going through periods of challenges. Like I've seen, I've had peers that, go through divorce or illness or
Yes.
financial strain. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons
Yeah.
why, when life gets hard, we might need a little extra support, and
Mhm.
to remember to ask for it sometimes I think is challenging, especially if you grew up and with any kind of trauma. We're used to dealing with things on our own, right? Like isolation is a trauma response.
Yes.
So yes, ask for help when you need it. Tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about, I'm always so curious about, you did allude to some childhood experiences that were really challenging. And I know you've been sober for 18 years now. That's amazing. But walk me through a little bit about what set the stage for you to lead you to addiction and then recovery.
So I had kind of I want to say it was unusual, but I also want to stress that it's not uncommon. When I was 4 years old, I started kindergarten, and my best friend um, lived with her mom, who was a single mom, and the house they lived in was the mom's older brothers, so the uncle's house. And my mom was raising me. She was married, but my dad he was a salesman and he was on the road all the time. So she basically had a lot of the caregiving responsibilities. And I imagine I was quite a young whippersnapper. And so when this family started inviting me over to their house on the weekends, my mom was like, cool, I can catch up on the laundry and maybe catch a nap. And this house was amazingly fun. It was in the 70s, and they had the rec room in the basement, and they had like a whole kids playroom all decked out. And I grew up on 180 acres of farmland, and it was pretty austere. And so this was like kind of a playland over there. But the unfortunate thing was the uncle, although he was a very prominent businessman in my home community, everybody knew him. He was in the business section and the social section of the papers all the time. He was also a sexual predator and a trafficker. And so from ages 4 to 9, I was involved in what became a fairly high profile trafficking case. We didn't call it trafficking back then. We didn't have the language that we have now. But he, was accused of taking adolescents and young children and using them as favors or sales tactics to further his business or political agenda. And in 1979, when I was 9 years old, he was arrested. He was indicted. He was put on trial, and he did go to jail for that. So at 9, my abuse / exploitation ended, but I think I just froze.
It's okay. I can still hear you.
Okay. So my abuse / exploitation ended, but we didn't have a really good language of what to do with people who had experienced something like this. So I'm a 9-year-old that has like a head full of knowledge that other 9-year-olds don't have. And it made me a little different from my cohorts. I did not realize this because, again, in my family, they did the best with what they knew at the time, but they just basically said, it's not happening. We're just going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and move on. And you don't need to talk about this anymore. And so that's kind of what I did. But by the time puberty hit, I started to figure out what I knew that other people didn't know. And again, I had experienced that for so long, and it had become normal to me that I didn't know how not to use those skills. And I ended up getting back into an exploited and eventually trafficking situation in my teenage years. And if you know anything about the sex trafficking world and the drug world, they overlap significantly. So by the time I was 16, I was introduced into substances. I very quickly found my substance of choice, which was opiates. And I went on my merry way in both worlds. Did not exit. I got into recovery when I was 32, but I had become a parent along those lines. And although becoming a parent was my strongest motivation to change, there was a lot of internalized guilt and shame when I would try and put my children first, and my addiction would say, no, I'm not going to allow that. My substance abuse was addressed when I was 32. I had a 4-year-old who was in out-of-home custody because I couldn't manage my substance use disorder, and it was affecting my parenting. And I ended up pregnant again. And so as a pregnant woman, I was eligible for additional services that as an individual single person, I was not. And I was identified to go to a gender-specific trauma-informed women's recovery program. And I am eternally grateful that it happened. I mean, thinking that I've got a second crisis pregnancy, that was about the worst news I had at that time, but it ended up being the most beneficial thing, because I probably would have never been eligible for this program in any other way. And it really did change my life. The counselor who did my assessment asked me, why do you use? And I answered heroin and crack, because I had gone to treatment a number of times, and they always ask you, what do you use? And they treat those things. And she reframed it and she said, no, not what, why? And I was like, well, I've been using for 16 years. I think I kind of forgot why I actually use, but she spent some time with me and we kind of explored some stuff, and we kind of went back, and I realized, oh, all that stuff from that childhood trafficking and the sex world that I experienced in my adolescence and adulthood, that's kind of shaped me. That has given me a lot of my worldview, and it's not working for me anymore. It's certainly not. I'm certainly not able to live like the mom I want to be, the parent I want to be, the caregiver I want to be, with these things in my life. And so I was given a safe place to take a pause, look at my life, look at the patterns that kind of shaped it, and then figure out how to intervene and change that direction. For me, the scariest day was on day 66 of treatment, when they said, guess what, you're fine, we're going to get you out of here. And I'm still pregnant. And I'm like, oh, well, you can't let me out of here. I'm not done. And they said, no, you can do this, but we want you to know there's transitional housing available for moms, either pregnant or parenting people who are either reunified with their kids or in the process of reunifying, which I was. And you can stay there up to 2 years. And I don't know if my recovery would look like it does today if I didn't have that, because I didn't have a safe, solid place to go back to housing-wise after my treatment. And I would have gone back into a sketchy situation, paying for housing week to week. And the only way I knew how to pay for that housing was an hour at a time in motel rooms. And so that gave me an opportunity to learn some new skills, develop a good parenting relationship with my kids. And 2 years later, I was able to get a job in the legitimate world. I was able to make a living wage and pay for my livelihood and my little family. And we moved on from there. So, when I look at barriers to people being successful in the recovery, I look at a lot of just the base physiological things: housing, food security, transportation. Do we have these things, or are these things that day in and day out I'm going to bump up against, and I'm going to have a reason to go back and say, F it, I know this other world all too well, and it makes sense to me. And this new world is just too difficult for me to navigate successfully.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's amazing how we can get used to certain things.
Mhm.
I heard this idea called shifting baseline syndrome, and it's the idea of during human evolution, humans need to adjust to occasional, evolution. From an evolution standpoint, it's about, there's famine, there's different weather conditions that people have to adapt to, and the shifting baseline means things get worse and we go, oh, this isn't so bad. And we get used to it. And then the baseline shifts lower and we go, oh, this isn't so bad. And it just can go on and on and on. And I think that's very common in addiction, where our lives just get worse and worse and worse, and we don't even notice it.
I saw a funny post over the weekend, and it said, the song "We're Not Gonna Take It" came out 40 years ago. But in fact, I think we have continued to take it.
Right up the hoo-ha. Oh my God.
That goes right to you're saying that, we do have these shifting
Yeah.
baselines, and, you can adjust to incremental things, but when you look just how far they shift over, I'm 51 at this point. When I think back to the 80s and 90s and where we were, there's definitely things that I feel that we've gone backwards on.
Girl, you are not lying. Oh my God. Yeah, listen, don't even get me started.
That's another podcast.
That's a whole nother thing. I really like to focus. Thank you so much for sharing that, and just really normalizing the fact that we do what we have to do to survive.
Yeah.
And when my boys were growing, I just want to address something you mentioned. When you were a teen, you became aware that you were comfortable with things and had knowledge of things, sexual behaviors or practices, or even a feeling. I mean, for me, it was like a feeling of empowerment. Like I felt powerless. I had sexual abuse in my childhood too, and I felt powerless. But in my teens, I learned that it was a tool or skill set that made me feel powerful.
You're
Right.
very correct.
Yeah. And, it was not lost on me that I recognized that teenage girls who are promiscuous, that is a red flag that they have been abused. And I remember when my boys are going through high school, even in junior high, they were going to a private Christian school. My boys don't know. My boys don't know the world that we live in. But I remember hearing language that made me highly uncomfortable. And I was like, look, just so you know, those girls that are behaving that way were taught to behave that way. And it's inappropriate. It was not consensual. And I don't want to ever hear you speak disparagingly about a girl who is acting out that way because she's a victim.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely more layers to it. And,
Yeah.
I'm pretty open about my experience, although I have quite a bit of distance from it at this point. And
Yeah.
I
Even for a
probably
long time.
it wasn't always like this. But, when I talk with other people in recovery at various points, and they pull me aside and they confide in me that they've had experiences on the childhood sexual abuse or,
Yeah.
exploitive relationships, and
Yeah.
it's a lot more common than we think it is. And
Yeah.
again, there's that internalized shame and bias that we hold, that we had some agency in this. We
Yeah.
didn't look at the full picture. I had a counselor who once said, when I was exiting the trafficking world, and they were bringing up that I was a trafficking survivor, and I was like, no, I was just in the sex world. And they're like, first of all, you can't consent to that prior to 18. Like, you just can't. So you were involved with it much younger than 18. So anything before that was trafficking. And then she said, when you were in second grade and the teacher said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Was it a sex worker? And I was like, nope. And they're like, well, then something happened that made that the best choice for you. And let's take a look at what those things are. And that was very skillful, because I did not see myself as a victim at all. And I had to realize that when life comes up at you in certain ways, you take the best option. And for me, that seemed like it would work for me for a time. And, and it was very different. You look at the billboards and they have little kids in handcuffs and cages and that's not how it happens usually. Like those are guerrilla style trafficking provocateurs. But that's 1 in 1,000. Like the 999 are much more finesse and skillful.
Well, yeah, there's that. Have you heard of the Underground Railroad? I forget what it stands for. Do you know who I'm talking about? I'm not getting their name right.
I mean, I know the Underground Railroad for slavery.
Oh no, there's there's an organization. I'll find it and put it in the show notes, but it's about an organization of adults who are trying to save children from modern day.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm 53 and I did a lot of drugs when I was I can't remember. Oh Lord have mercy. But anyway, I was doing I was getting some education about their organization, and they mentioned that the US is the number one consumer of child pornography, and pedophiles don't, just like the way we used to think of alcoholics. We have this stereotypical image of a guy in a trench coat with a paper bag over a bottle under a bridge. No, that's not what an alcoholic is. It's like I can raise my hand and be like, it looks like me, or someone suffering with alcohol use disorder, however you want to frame it now. But pedophiles are the same. They look, and we don't. So I don't want to spend a lot of time. I'm going to ask you a question, but I don't want to dwell on it. Do you think a pedophile can be rehabilitated?
In most cases, I do.
Really?
I think we have to, and it took me a long time to be able to say this, because before I was like, nope, no, I'm not going to deal with this. But having, I'm an advocate, and I meet other advocates, and I've met advocates that have run housing and service programs for sexual offenders. And I always try to approach things with an attitude of curiosity. Somebody told me you can't be curious and critical in the same moment. So instead of being criticizing something, open your mind up, be curious of how they came to this opinion. And I've learned, that just like trafficking survivors adapted to their world, people who solicit or are agents for using trafficking survivors they have experiences as well that became their best option. And there are a few that just kind of have that just sadistic, manipulative trait. But that's probably in the minority as well. And those are the ones we want to stereotype and put into a nice little comfortable box in our head. But we've got to be much more open and nuanced about this and realize the levels of complexity if we actually want to make a dent in it. Like, we have to realize that nice boy or girl who took your son or daughter to the prom could, eventually say, oh, I'd love to take you to Virginia Beach, dear, but the car won't take us. So I need to get $900 in service to it before we can go on this vacation. And I don't know how we're going to get that. Oh, I've thought of an idea how we could get that. I hate to ask you this, but would you? And then, perfectly nice, reasonable people say, oh, just this once. I'll do that just this once.
Oh, yeah, that's how it happens so subtly. And it's very, very subtle.
Yep.
Well, thank you for that perspective, because it's easy to demonize people, and it's a very, I think, mature spiritual perspective to be like, we're still human, and there needs to be hope and redemption for everyone. I want there to be a safe place for those people to get help, so they get help, so that they can stop hurting others.
Yeah.
So there's that. Thank you for that. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about you lost 80 pounds during the pandemic. Oh, congratulations. That is amazing. I think you lost them. I think I found some of them. And you did mention going to OA, and I feel like a lot of my listeners are probably around my age. I don't know. And it seems like as you get older, weight issues are harder. And I myself have I'm like, I don't know the struggle. I'm not in touch with the struggle of addiction the way I was when I first got sober. That girl, I am very intimately familiar with the struggle with like food and sugar and all that. That's so hard.
Yes.
Can you walk me through sort of like, did you have to have like a bottom? And
I didn't, we sometimes tell people in recovery that there's nothing more beautiful than a fat and happy addict, recovering addict. And because so many of us come in so scrawny and malnourished and unhealthy. Yeah. So like getting somebody some sugar and carbs, and fatten them up, look, you're living healthy, but then that can swing a little too far.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that a lot of us in recovery struggle with weight and health as a result of it. And I turned 50 and I am 5'2", so I am very short. And I hit 200 pounds, and then I hit 205 and 210. And at 215, it was March of 2020, and the lockdown had just happened for the pandemic, and I was now working from home. So I used to be on the road all the time, and I'd be hungry and I'd just swing through a drive-through and eat something without really thinking about what I was eating, just something to stuff in my face. And it was, fast food's cheap too, comparatively to, good
healthy
food.
Yeah.
So being at home, having a little more time to spend in the kitchen, I said, I'm going to try and just look at my relationship with food. I didn't really set out to change it all that much. I signed up for an online program that I had heard little ads for, and I was like, I'll give that a try. And it used some psychology. It used cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, is that Noom? Did you sign up for Noom? Yeah, I heard good things about Noom.
Yep. And so I used the lessons, and it basically started having me explore, just like recovery did, my relationship with food, the choices that I made, my cravings, how I satisfied my cravings. And in doing that, and then it gave me a calorie budget and said, try and stay within this. Don't hurt yourself. Don't be guilty if you go over it. But we're going to give you a framework of categorizing foods and caloric density of green foods. You can have all sorts of them. Yellow foods, you can enjoy them, but in a moderate amount. And red foods, you can have them, but they're going to take a bigger dent out of your caloric budget for the day. And do you really want that, or do you want a lot more green foods to be more satisfied? So there's some days I'm like, I'm going for the red food. Absolutely. But over time, I started to make better choices of food and better portion sizes, and stopped going to, started meal prepping instead of, going through the drive-through. And I did that for about 6 months and lost, I want to say, about 30 pounds at that point. And then I said, I feel a little better. I think I'm going to move a little more. And prior to that, I was like a dedicated sedentary person. Like, only reason I'm getting up and moving if something's chasing me. And I started with, I live at like a T. There's a road that is right in front of my house, and it's a half block. It's not even a full block. And I walked around that half block, and I think it was 784 feet. And I remember getting home that first day and going like, "Ooh, that was a good workout." But it was perfect because I wasn't too tired or sore not to do it the next day. And so I started just going on a little walk, and then ended up having more energy. So I'd add another half block to it. And then I'm a sucker for animals. I love animals. And there was a 5K for animal rescue. And I'm like, I'm going to sign up for that. And that was it. Once I started running, there was no turning back.
So you run now? Is running
I
is
run
part of
now,
you're
yes.
a runner. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you said I don't run unless someone's chased me, I was like, yep, that's
Yep.
me.
No, now I'm going out elective. I'll go out in the rain and the snow. I don't know how this happened. This was not planned, but
Oh, that is so exciting for me to hear. I feel so much more hopeful. I swear to God, half these podcasts are just like therapy. Maybe I should just change the name to Therapy for Arlena. Yeah, I'm not so terminally unique though. I love that idea that you had a goal, the 5K for the animals. I have on occasion used things like I did Tough Mudder one year. Oh my God, I was insane. Or a vacation. If I know that I'm going to be somewhere sunny and might be tempted to put on a bathing suit, I might.
Yep. Give yourself some motivation. Tie it
Yes.
to a goal.
Tied to a goal. I love that. No, that's really good. And did you find that during that process of changing your relationship to food, you were able to uncover stuff that was unresolved and resolve it?
Oh, certainly. I mean, the one thing that I realized going through this was that I had gotten very comfortable in a bigger body because it, in my trafficking experience, everything was, sexualized based on my physical appearance. So making my physical appearance less attractive, I would be solicited less by unwanted romantic attention. And
that girl, that ain't romantic.
no, it's not romantic, but
no, yeah, I know.
it was one of the, like, I didn't have skills on how to deal with those types of unwanted interactions.
Right, unwanted attention. Yeah.
And they happened less often in a bigger body.
Yeah.
So, so as I got smaller and that attention started to come back, I'm like, all right, now, as a 50-year-old lady, we're going to have to address this. But yeah, so there was definitely some interesting things. And again, I don't have a problem with body size at all. For me, it was tied to health. And the bigger my body got, I learned that every 10 pounds is what was it? Oh no, I can't remember.
Increases your rate.
Yeah, they increase the joints, the pressure on your joints.
Yeah.
So like, as you lose weight, you can walk easier because you've got less, your knees hurt less, your hips hurt less, back hurts less.
Right.
So I had high blood pressure, I had pre-diabetes, I had some cholesterol issues. So there was just a number of things that were gonna be chronic health conditions if I didn't nip them in the bud. And, for me, the pandemic gave me an opportunity to kind of change my framework of my busy day-to-day life and add in a physical wellness component to my recovery. I had done the emotional work, I'd done the spiritual work, I had changed a lot of things environmentally, but I hadn't done anything physically.
I just recently interviewed this gal, Beverly Sartain, and she does the 4 levels. It's like mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. She says the physical is the hardest to and I have heard, and I would agree with that, by the way, because there's not a lot of attention, or I think the awareness of the tools that are available to heal the physical aren't talked about as much as the emotional and spiritual and mental. So the physical is super important.
Think about it, the way our healthcare system and insurance system in America is set up, it's hard to access good care in an affordable way.
Yeah. And I'm not solely talking about, like, the fitness industry is huge. So I'm not necessarily talking, we don't have a lot of fitness tools, but like what you said about the weight being sort of a way to protect yourself. Like I heard a long time ago that people who have obesity issues probably have some sort of sexual abuse in their history. So that's a sign when can we please be more compassionate towards people that are holding weight? There's that. But what you said about as the weight came off, you had to readdress, the way the attention that you got. And we're talking, I would imagine that we're talking about things that men say to you or out in public.
It's not even just men. It's, you know, women have a culture of when they see women that they find attractive or want to emulate, they use language of that basically diminishes themselves and puts other women on a pedestal. And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, there's enough space for all of us to
Yeah.
celebrate. And so
Right. Oh, I didn't think about that. That is so interesting. So you're losing weight and your friends, your women friends are like, oh, you look amazing. That means I'm a piece of crap.
yeah, or I
That must
wish
be
I could
hard to
do that.
hear.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know, no, 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 no. This is my wellness journey, but I invite you to have, you know, an arena where you can explore your relationship with these things, whether it's size, whether it's food, whether it's wellness, whether it's trauma that's holding you back and making kind of things come up in your life that are manifesting in ways you didn't think. You know, this is, I would just want us to be safe people, to again be beautifully flawed, imperfect people with
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah. But safe. Safe is good. Safe and
It's,
loved.
yeah,
Yeah. I love that we create these safe environments for people where they can feel their feelings and heal from all that stuff. That's really
yeah.
good. Before I know we're coming up on our time, before I turn you loose, I know that you mentioned the one website earlier, the Thrive Peer Support.
ThrivePeerSupport.com.
Yeah. Are you also on social media? Is there other ways that people can reach out to you?
Gosh, we are on social media. I know we have a Facebook, we have a Twitter, but it's not terribly active. We're on LinkedIn.
Oh,
I heard we have a TikTok, but I'm too old to keep up on those things. But I can get you all the information to you if
yeah.
you put them in the show notes
Please do.
after.
Yeah, there's yeah, I'm 53, so you're not too old for TikTok. I just started. I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, it's just a bunch of kids. No, turns out there's all kinds of people.
I hear
Oh
there's quite a big recovery community on
my
there.
God, it's huge. I had no idea. Like I was living on Facebook and Instagram, and there are large recovery communities there, but we're everywhere. Wherever you go, there we are.
In America, there's 23 million people identifying as living in recovery. So there,
Identifying. That's not
yeah,
even counting the people who are struggling and just are in denial.
yep.
There's
Or who don't talk about it. You
or
know,
who don't
there's a
talk
lot of
about
us
it.
that
Yeah.
we just need a little touch up, and you don't identify as a person in recovery. It was just something you dealt with back then. So there's
Right.
23 million of us that say, yes, I'm in recovery.
Yes. Well, thank you for saying yes, you are in recovery and being willing to talk about all the hard things, right? In hopes that
Yep.
other people recover as well. Well, Chana, you are just a blessing. I've really enjoyed speaking with you and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an honor.
Right. And we'll talk soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.